She pushed open the door of the richest office in the country. She was here to beg for the multi-million-dollar grant that had saved her dying empire. But as the high-back leather chair spun around, sitting in the chairman's seat was the exact same lowly waiter she'd slapped, humiliated, and poured water over just 7 days ago in front of the city's elite. The man she'd called background noise and a stain on the floor was now the only person on earth who could sign her lifeline. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video, share, and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Is it United States, London, maybe Canada, Jamaica, South Africa, or anywhere? We want to know. And tell us what you learned at the end of this video. Before I tell you how she drowned in that office, I need to tell you how the rain started. I need to take you back to the beginning. In my village, the old men who sit under the baobab tree have a strict rule. They say, if a man in rags knocks on your door during a heavy storm, don't look at his feet. Look at his eyes. The spirits of the earth don't wear gold when they come to test the hearts of men. They warned us that a king will sometimes wear the skin of a beggar, just to see who'll offer him a cup of clean water and who'll kick dust into his face. I live in Lagos now. It's a city of concrete, glass, and noise. We don't have baobab trees here. We have streetlights that only work half the time. We don't have village elders. We have politicians in bulletproof SUVs. In this city, people think the old rules are dead. They think money is the only spirit that matters. If you drive a big car, you're a god. If you walk on foot, you're invisible. You're nothing. I work as a night shift security porter. I stand at the doors of places I could never afford to enter, opening them for men who spend my yearly salary on a single bottle of imported water. I see the masks people wear. I see how they smile at the cameras and how they curse at the drivers. 7 days before that meeting in the boardroom, I was assigned to the service entrance of the Grand Ivory Hotel. The air was thick that night. It was the dry season, and the wind carried the smell of roasted plantain from the street hawkers and the heavy, choking exhaust of the massive diesel generators that keep the hotel glowing like a diamond in the dark. I was standing by the loading dock when I saw a man. He was wearing a white waiter's shirt, but it was cheap. The collar was fraying, and the fabric was so thin you could see his undershirt. He was holding a heavy brass serving tray. It was an old thing, tarnished brown, with a deep dent in the left corner. It looked like it belonged in a village market, not a five-star hotel. I walked up to him to tell him to move. The VIPs were arriving, and the manager didn't want the low-level staff standing near the red carpet. I opened my mouth to shout at him. But then he looked at me. His eyes were completely calm. There was no fear in them, no exhaustion. Most men who work the floor for 12 hours have a broken look in their eyes, but this man looked like he was deciding the fate of the world. He reached into his pocket and handed me a sealed bottle of cold water. He didn't say a word. He just nodded and walked into the hotel. I held the cold plastic bottle in my hand. My chest felt strange. I looked down at the ground where he'd been standing. The visitor had no shadow. The inside of the Grand Ivory that night was blinding. It was the annual Luminous Gala, the night where the billionaires, the politicians, and the internet stars come to show off. The air conditioning was turned up so high my fingers felt stiff, but you could still smell the sweet, heavy scent of imported French perfume mixed with the sweat of the kitchen staff working behind the swinging doors. The room was filled with gold lace, diamond watches, and shoes that cost more than a plot of land. People were laughing, taking pictures, and completely ignoring the people serving them. And then there was Zane. If you read the news, you know Omnicorp. You know the company that owns the fiber optic cables under the ocean and the towers that give the city its network. Zane's the man who built it. But Zane is a ghost. He doesn't show his face on magazines. He doesn't attend parties in expensive suits. That night, Zane was the man in the cheap white shirt. He was the man holding the tarnished brass tray. I watched him from my post near the emergency exit. He was moving through the tables slowly, carrying glasses of ice water and small plates of food. He wasn't rushing like the other waiters. He was watching the guests. He was watching how a wealthy man spoke to the girl filling his wine glass, how a famous actress rolled her eyes when a cleaner accidentally bumped her chair. Zane was hunting. He was looking for a business partner for a massive community project. He had the money, but he needed a face for the campaign. He wanted someone who loved people, not just cameras. He carried that dented brass tray like it was a shield. It was a test. In a room full of polished silver, he wanted to see who'd be disgusted by a piece of tarnished metal. At exactly 10 p.m., Elena arrived. She didn't walk into the room, she invaded it. She had 3 assistants walking behind her. One was holding a small ring light, and another was holding her second phone. She was the biggest social media influencer in the city. Her entire life was a brand built on luxury. She was wearing a dress made of pure white silk that dragged on the floor slightly, catching the light like spilled milk. She sat at the center table. She was loud, complaining about the temperature of the room, the color of the napkins, and the fact that the VIP gift bags weren't big enough. Zane approached her table. He was holding a glass pitcher of iced water on his brass tray, condensation dripping down the sides of the glass. He stepped close to her chair to refill the cup of the man sitting next to her. As he leaned in, Elena abruptly pushed her chair back to pose for a picture. The leg of her chair hit Zane's knee. Zane stumbled. It wasn't a big fall, he just lost his balance for 1 second. The glass pitcher tilted. 3 drops of cold water fell from the spout. They didn't even hit her skin, they landed on the very edge of her white silk sleeve. The jazz band in the corner stopped playing at that exact moment to tune their instruments. The silence in the room was sudden, and it was absolute. Elena looked at her sleeve. Then she slowly turned her head and looked at Zane. She didn't just get angry. She transformed. Her face, which looked so sweet and perfect for the cameras, twisted into a knot of pure disgust. "Are you entirely stupid?" she asked. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the quiet room like a razor blade. Zane immediately lowered his head. "I'm very sorry, madam. It was an accident. I'll get a dry cloth immediately." "Don't speak to me!" she shouted. Now her voice was loud. People at the other tables stopped eating. They turned to watch. "Do you have any idea what this fabric is? You could work every day of your miserable life and still not afford the thread on this hem." She stood up. She was wearing heels, making her taller than Zane as he bowed his head. She pointed her finger right between his eyes. "Look at you," she spat. "Look at your dirty, cheap uniform. Look at this disgusting tray you're carrying. Why do they let people like you near people like us? You're nothing. You're a stain on this room. People like you are just background noise to people like me." My chest felt incredibly tight. My hands balled into fists by my sides. I could hear the low, heavy hum of the central AC unit pushing cold air into the room. To make it worse, she turned to her wealthy friends at the table. She smiled a cruel, cold smile. "Watch this," she whispered to them. She picked up her own full glass of iced water. She looked Zane right in the eyes, and she tilted the glass. She poured the ice-cold water directly over his head. The water soaked his hair. It ran down his face, dripping off his chin and soaking into the thin fabric of his cheap shirt. The ice cubes fell to the carpet with a dull thud. "Clean it up," she said, dropping the empty glass onto his brass tray. "And then get out of my sight before I have security throw you into the gutter." The entire table laughed. A cold, sharp laughter. Zane didn't raise his hand to wipe his face. He didn't shout back. He just stood there. The water dripped from his nose.
He looked at her with that same calm, terrifying expression he'd had when I met him at the loading dock. He slowly knelt down on the carpet, picked up the ice cubes with his bare hands, placed them on the dented brass tray, and stood up. He turned and walked away. He didn't look broken. He looked like a judge who just finished writing a death sentence. The city of Lagos doesn't care about your feelings. It only cares about your pocket. A week after the gala, the dry season heat was worse. The red dust was thicker. Elena was in trouble. The people who watched her videos were getting bored. Her sponsors were pulling their money because she was spending too much and bringing in too little. She needed a miracle to keep her luxury life from collapsing.
She needed the Omnicorp Community Grant, a $50 million deal that'd save her company and put her face on every billboard in the country. She managed to secure a meeting with the CEO of Omnicorp, the mysterious Zane. This is the moment she thought she'd conquered the world. I was working at the Omnicorp Tower that day. My security company had transferred me to the lobby desk. The lobby is massive, the floors made of white Italian marble that shines like a mirror, the walls made of thick, bulletproof glass. Elena walked through the revolving doors at exactly 1 p.m. She looked like a queen coming to claim her throne. She was wearing a sharp red business suit, walking past my desk without even looking at me. She just held up her ID card with 2 fingers, expecting me to open the security gates for her. As she walked toward the private VIP elevators, she had to pass a small section of the floor that was being cleaned. A man was on his hands and knees. He was wearing a dark blue janitor's jumpsuit. The fabric was heavy and smelled faintly of bleach and floor wax. He was scrubbing a scuff mark off the marble with a small sponge. Beside him was a yellow plastic bucket of soapy water. It was Zane. He was doing it again. He was down in the dirt, feeling the pulse of his own building. He wanted to see how the people who visited his tower treated the people who kept it clean. Elena stopped walking. She looked down at the man in the blue jumpsuit. She didn't recognize his face from the gala. To her, all the help looked exactly the same. They were all just background noise. The heavy glass doors of the building slid shut behind her, cutting off the noise of the traffic outside. The lobby was dead quiet, except for the sound of the wet sponge on the marble. "Excuse me," Elena snapped. Zane kept his head down, scrubbing the floor. "Yes, madam." "Please be careful. The floor's very slippery right here." Elena scoffed. It was a loud, ugly sound. "I don't need safety advice from a floor scrubber. Move your bucket. You're blocking the path to the executive elevator." Zane slowly lifted his head. "There's plenty of room to walk around, madam. I just need 1 more minute to finish this spot." Elena's face hardened. She felt untouchable today. She was about to meet a billionaire. She didn't have time for this. She stepped forward and intentionally kicked the side of the yellow plastic bucket with her expensive shoe. The bucket tipped over. A wave of dirty, gray, soapy water washed across the pristine white marble. It completely soaked the knees of Zane's blue jumpsuit and flooded his work boots. Zane sat back on his heels, sitting in the puddle of dirty water. Elena laughed. "Now you have a real mess to clean up. Get out of my way. You're staining the floor just by existing on it." She stepped right over his legs, leaving wet footprints on the marble, and pressed the button for the elevator. She felt victorious. She took out her phone, fixed her hair in the camera reflection, and smiled. She thought she was climbing to the top of the mountain. She didn't know the mountain was a volcano, and she'd just lit the match. The gold elevator doors opened with a soft ding. The cables groaned a deep metallic sound as the box pulled her up, floor by floor, toward the 40th level. The 40th floor is where the air changes. It doesn't smell like the street, and it doesn't smell like cleaning supplies. It smells like old paper, leather, and absolute silence. Elena stepped out of the elevator. A secretary in a sharp suit guided her down a long hallway toward the boardroom. Elena's heart was beating fast, but it was a good beat. It was the thrill of the win. She was rehearsing her pitch in her head. She was going to talk about her values. She was going to talk about how her brand represents empowerment and community upliftment. She was ready to tell the mystery billionaire exactly what he wanted to hear. The secretary opened the heavy mahogany doors. The boardroom was the size of a small house. A massive table made of dark, polished wood stretched across the center. At the very end of the room, facing the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the ocean, was a high-back, black leather chair. Elena walked in. Her $2,000 heels clicked against the hardwood floor. Tick, tick, tick. A heavy grandfather clock in the corner of the room was the only sound. She stopped at the edge of the table. Lying right in front of the empty chair was her grant application. A $50 million document. Beside the document, sitting perfectly centered on the dark wood, was a heavy, tarnished brass tray with a dent in the left corner. Elena frowned. Why would a piece of garbage be sitting on the chairman's desk? "Sir," Elena said, her voice dropping into that sweet, practiced tone. "It's such an honor to finally meet you. I'm Elena. I'm here to discuss how my platform can bring a new level of class and community to Omnicorp." The leather chair groaned. It was a slow, heavy sound. The chair began to turn. The chair spun around. Zane was sitting there. He wasn't wearing a cheap, wet white shirt. He wasn't wearing a blue jumpsuit soaked in dirty floor water. He was wearing a suit so perfectly tailored, it looked like it was painted on him in shadows. His watch caught the sunlight from the window. But his face was exactly the same calm, terrifying eyes. This is the moment the world stopped spinning for Elena. The color vanished from her skin. Her jaw physically dropped. Her hands began to shake so violently she had to grab the edge of the wooden table just to stay on her feet. The man who owned the building. The man who held the $50 million. The man she needed to save her life. It was the waiter she'd slapped. It was the janitor whose bucket she'd kicked just 5 minutes ago. Zane didn't stand up. He didn't raise his voice. He leaned forward and rested his hands on the table, right next to the dented brass tray. "Class," Zane said. His voice was quiet, but it filled every corner of the massive room. "Community." Elena opened her mouth. She tried to force air from her lungs. I didn't... You were... "I was background noise." Zane finished the sentence for her. He picked up the brass tray. "My mother used to sell roasted corn on the side of the expressway using this tray. She stood in the dust and the exhaust fumes for 12 hours a day so I could learn how to read. People in big cars used to splash mud on her when it rained. They never apologized. They didn't see a human being. They just saw a stain on the road." He set the tray down with a heavy thud. "I built this company to prove that the people at the bottom are the foundation of the world," Zane continued, his eyes locking onto hers, pinning her in place. "I wanted to give this grant to someone who understood that. I spent the last 2 weeks walking my own floors, wearing the clothes of the people who sweat for me. I wanted to see who they had to deal with." Elena started crying. Real, ugly tears. Black makeup ran down her face. "Please," she whispered. "Please, Mr. Zane, it was a mistake. I was stressed. I didn't know who you were." "That's exactly the point," Zane said. The silence in the room was so heavy it felt like the air pressure was crushing my chest. "You only treat people like human beings when you know they have the power to destroy you. When you thought I was a waiter, you poured water on me. When you thought I was a cleaner, you kicked dirt on me. You don't have bad days, Elena. You have a bad heart." He picked up the gold pen lying next to her application. Elena held her breath. She thought maybe he'd show mercy. Zane looked at the paper. Then he looked up at the door. "Tunde!" he called out. The mahogany doors opened. A young man walked in. He was wearing a cheap security uniform. It was the junior guard from the lobby, the boy who'd run over with a towel to help Zane clean up the dirty water after Elena had kicked the bucket. Zane handed the gold pen to Tunde. He pushed the $50 million grant application toward the edge of the desk. "Cross out her company's name," Zane told the young guard. "Write down the name of the orphanage in Surulere where you volunteer on weekends. Omnicorp is funding them instead. You're the new director of our community outreach." Tunde's hands shook as he took the pen. Elena let out a sound like a wounded animal. Zane looked back at Elena. His face was completely blank. "You told me to clean up my mess and get out of your sight. I'm returning the favor. My office is clean now. You know where the door is." Elena walked out of that room. She didn't take the VIP elevator. She walked down the stairs. By the time she reached the ground floor, she was a ghost. The news of the canceled grant leaked the next day. Her sponsors vanished. Her followers moved on to the next shiny thing. Her empire crumbled into dust in less than a month. She lost the cars, the penthouse, and the silk dresses. I still work at the Omnicorp building. Zane made sure my security firm gave me a permanent post on the executive floor. I see him every morning. He still wears the expensive suits,
But every time he drinks coffee, he drinks it from a chipped enamel cup. He told me once, "A man who forgets the taste of the dust will eventually choke on his own gold." My final warning to you is simple. When you walk out of your house today, look at the people you pass. Look at the person sweeping the street. Look at the person serving your food. Look at the person holding the door. Don't look at their shoes. Don't look at their uniform. Look at them with respect. Because you never know who's holding the pen that'll write the final chapter of your life. The person you call background noise today might be the only voice that can save you tomorrow. Hope you enjoyed watching as much as I love creating. If this touched your heart, please kindly like, share, and subscribe. Comment where you're watching from. Thank you, and see you in the next video.